Love yourself first. This was one of my lessons, my 2023 lessons on self. This video is for people who have had to love beyond their capacity or beyond what they had planned for. People who have had to step in and become assistant parents, the firstborns who've had to assist, those who've had to take on stepchildren, or those who've had to take on people who are not part of their family and begin to consider them family, those who've had to love beyond their capacity or beyond what was planned, what they had planned for, especially if this is something that you had to start doing from the time that you were young, that you had to start thinking beyond even what you are capable of doing, beyond what you are capable of. This video is for such people, and the main purpose of this video is to begin to nudge you or gently prod you or to gently remind you to give love to yourself also, but then to give that love to yourself first. Now I'm going to define love. I love the Bible definition of love, and it's just love is patient and love is kind. For me, that is how I define it. I know that there are many things that are said afterwards, but I'm saying what it is, not what it doesn't do. Love is patient and love is kind. Now, growing up, most of us, when we are being taught about love, when we're being taught about being loving, we are taught about loving, expressing it, about love externally, about giving love to others. I don't know if any of us ever remembers as a child being taught how to love ourselves. The focus is usually on loving your neighbors, on loving God, on loving others, on loving your siblings, on loving your enemies. But I personally was never ever taught in primary, in Sunday school, in secondary, how do you love yourself? This is something that most of us have to learn when we actually grow big. Now I'm going to go back to the definitions that I have from the Bible, because I feel like they give very good definitions about love. And there was a way that love was summarized as the 2 commandments, summarizing everything, summarizing the commandments, the 2 commandments that Jesus actually gave. And he said the first commandment was love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. And the second commandment, which was like that one, was to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, usually when we are being taught this in Sunday school or wherever, the focus, what's put before us is you really need to love God. Yes, love God, love God, love God. We don't know how to do that. They say by giving money, all sorts of things, but you really need to love God. Then they tell you, love your neighbor. The as yourself is almost quiet. It is almost silent. And yet I feel like it is such an important thing to highlight, because as is used as a comparison to show that the way that something should be done or the way that something is done. Another word for as is in the same way that. So when we say love your neighbor as yourself, effectively what we are saying is love your neighbor in the same way that you love yourself. And I think this is where I really want to shine a light and to remind those of us who were raised and began to love sacrificially early, the firstborns, the assistant parents, the step parents also, the stepchildren, the ones who had extended family in their homes for long, those who had to love sacrificially. You get to a point where you do not know how to love yourself, or you forget that loving yourself is important, or you forget that you are also a person who needs to be loved. So if we are talking about loving neighbor, we have to remember to love ourselves, because we can only love that neighbor in the same way that we love ourselves. So that was number 1. Something that I wanted to highlight. Now, last year, as I was reflecting on this love, especially the love as it's described in the Bible, I came across a scripture in John, I think 1 John, where John was asking, I don't know who he was writing to, but he was asking, let us get serious, people. How can you say that you love a God who you cannot see, and yet you cannot love your brother who you see? And for me, that really, really hit me. Because remember, what we are saying is love God, love others, love self. But John is saying you cannot say that you love your brother, that you love a God who you cannot see, when you do not love your brother who you see. So I decided to work backwards. How can I say that I love my brother when I do not love myself? Because I'm supposed to love this brother as I love myself. And that for me really cemented the thinking or the opinion that loving self is the foundation of all the love that we can give. Because if I do not love myself, then I cannot love my brother, because I cannot love myself, as in because I have to love my brother or the others in the way that I love myself. If I do not love my brother who I am seeing, then I cannot say that I love a God who I cannot see. Do you see how that can actually, how that shows a sequence of how the love actually flows? It flows from the inside and trickles. When it overflows from you, it flows to the people around you. And because you love the people around you, then you have to love God, the one who created them. It actually flows to him. So I realized that the foundation of us expressing love is in us actually loving ourselves first. Being kind, and I'm going to use that, being kind and patient with ourselves first. Now, usually when we grow up, when we begin to think about loving self, when we get into the whole self-love thing, the thing that we're usually looking at is going on vacation, buying ourselves clothes, dressing up well, going out and eating well, things like that, things that are extrinsic, buying ourselves nice things, nice clothes, nice shoes, nice cars, and we call that self-love, self-love. But I think that the question I want to ask is, as you're doing all those things, are you being kind and patient with yourself? Because at times we do these things not so much for us, but to show others that we are loving ourselves. So still we are not loving ourselves, we are showing off. Yeah? So the thing to keep reminding and to keep asking yourself as you're doing these things is, am I being kind to myself, and am I being patient to myself, or am I doing this to show off or to show others that I can do it? What is the driver behind that? Now, in 2020, I enrolled in a course, a self-concept course, where we deal with how we form identities, using memories, the way we think about ourselves, and that how actually shows up in the way that we behave, the way we interact, what we believe about ourselves. And as we are doing that, we would work on different attributes or values, attributes like love, peace, joy, care, intelligence, things that are important to us. We would work on those different attributes, seeing what they mean to us, how they show up in our lives. There are times when we are not those attributes, what was actually driving, what was actually happening in our lives that caused us not to be those attributes. And one of the attributes that kept coming up was love. And in this course, what would happen is love was split into two different attributes. It was split, so there was love at the top, and then there was either being loving or being lovable. Now, the first question that would be asked, especially if you're working on the attribute of being loving, you would be asked, are you being loving to yourself? Are you loving to yourself? And I remember for many of the students, me included, that was such a shock. Because usually when we think I am loving, you think I am loving to my parents, I am loving to my friends, I am loving to children, I am loving to others. But if we're asked, are you loving to yourself? Then you have to think twice about that. Because you need to be loving to yourself, because you're a person too. You are people too. You're others too. You're a person who needs to be loved. So you need to be loving to yourself, being kind and being patient to yourself as well. Now, the second attribute was being lovable. Now, that was an even more shocking one, because to say that I am a person who is lovable is to say that I am a person who deserves to be loved. And for many of us, that is something that we do not actually consider. If I was to ask you, who is listening to me right now, who is listening to the sound of my voice, do you believe that you are lovable? And if you can really truly answer that question, and then see whether it's a firm yes or whether it's a something I've never ever thought about, then you'll begin to understand what you're tolerating, what you're allowing in your life, what you're accepting, what you're letting happen to you. Because if you are loving yourself and if you believe you are lovable, then there are things that you will not accept. Allowing someone to abuse you, to misuse you, to call you names, to disrespect you is you not loving yourself. Especially if you have the power to remove yourself from that. And even if you don't have the power, you will still find a way to protect you. So letting someone do all that to you is you not loving yourself. You not believing that you are lovable. You actually accepting that this is all I can get and settling for that. So those are things that I really want us to think about and to consider that in order for us to be loving and to be the people who can give this love to others and express this love to a God who we cannot see, we need to first start by learning how to love ourselves. Now, one of the things that usually shows that someone is having an issue with self-love or having an issue with loving themselves is when they find that they are being very judgmental. Firstly, of themselves, and then as it gets really, really more difficult, judgmental towards others. Because in order for you to judge yourself, it means you're being unkind to yourself and you're being impatient. In order for you to really judge yourself. And by the time you go from judging yourself to judging others, it means that self-hate, that self-contempt has overflowed and now you're extending it to others. This is something that is usually very common among the very religious. I don't know why. I've been there before. I understand that it's because in the end, you actually don't love yourself, but you don't know that that's what's going on. You don't know that that's what's happening. You have this self-hate, this self-contempt. You feel like you're not attaining what you need to attain. There's a standard that you feel like you need to attain and you're not hitting it, and then you're impatient with yourself, and then you're unkind to yourself, and then you begin to judge yourself, and then you begin to extend that to others. So if this is something that you feel like you are really, really struggling with, you find yourself talking so badly to yourself, you find yourself judging yourself, you find yourself judging others, judging the way that people dress, judging the way that people talk, judging the way that people look. When people do things, you judge them. And you keep asking yourself, why am I like this? Because you do not feel good when you're doing that. I've been there before, because I've been religious before. You don't feel good when you're doing that, because it's not a good feeling to not like yourself. It's not a good feeling to hate yourself. If this is something that you have struggled with, please reach out, because we can do the work to heal what needs to be healed, to repair what needs to be repaired, to remove and to uproot what needs to be uprooted, to forgive what needs to be forgiven, so that you can begin to find it within you, to be kind and patient with you, to love you, because when you love you, then you can love others. And when you love others, then you can confidently say that I love God. So use the link in the description. Reach out if this is something that you feel like you'd like to do some work on, and let's see how we can work together to help you get to the point where you can love you, where you can love you first.